Good morning, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me again this morning for another episode of It's More Than Just Paperwork. So we've done this a few times now. We started off talking about job descriptions, then we went to job postings. Now we're going to talk about interviews and interview guides, because really, when you have somebody sitting in front of you and you're trying to hire your next great team member, being prepared and knowing what questions to ask in advance is so important to not only you having confidence in making the right decision, but presenting a great presentation for the individual, knowing that you're prepared is going to make them feel more confident about joining your team. So why are interview guides important? I mean, so many people just say, I just get a gut feeling and I know. Some people are like, I just take it on the fly. I like to have, casual conversation. I don't like to ask questions. I just get a feel for the person. And those are all great ways to think of an interview and to come and present yourself in an interview. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a different idea, other than just going with the gut or making it super casual. And I'll tell it to you in a story. So at Essential HR, when I was hiring our first person to come on board, when I went from solopreneur to dynamic duo, I made it myself an interview guide. I made a job description. We posted it, got resumes, screened the resumes, and I started doing interviews. And there was one individual who I did an interview with, and we connected so well. And of course, I'm doing interviews over the phone as a first step, because our team is spread out from Southwestern Ontario all the way to BC. And the individual I was speaking to, we talked about family. We connected on a lot of different levels. We talked about her experience. But one of the things that I did incorrectly in my years of HR experience and thousands of interviews that I've done is I threw out the interview guide. And because that connection was so strong, and this individual is such a personable individual and a fantastic individual, I didn't ask the detailed questions that I needed to know to find out not only does she have a background in HR, but she can do the things that I needed her to do in the specific tasks she has experience in start to finish of accomplishing them. So she came on board, and in a few short months, we realized the experience that I needed to have on the team, she didn't have those capacities. Now, it was nothing to say she was a fantastic individual. I have no regrets in pushing her forward to another HR role in which she did have the experience. But unfortunately, for what we needed at Essential HR, she didn't have that experience. And whose fault was that at the end of the day? I'll tell you, it was mine. It was mine because I threw away the interview guide and I didn't ask the questions to find out the right answer to know that she could do the work that I needed her to do. And that's why I say that gut is important. That connection, that cultural feel is important. But making sure that you're prepared to ask the questions that you need to ask in order to get the answers that you need to know to make a great hiring decision, you need to be prepared with an interview guide. So when you build your interview guide, and there's a link in the notes here saying you can download some of our favorite interview questions. And these are just general questions that we often intermix in with the interview guides that we make for our clients. So when we make interview guides for our clients and for our recruitment jobs, we usually do a 2 or 3 stage interview guide. The first is the pre-screen. And a lot of times our clients have us pre-screen individuals to screen out the individuals that don't make the cut and to move the individuals who do forward. And then we build a second and third interview guide if necessary, depending on the recruitment flow that the client wants. So what should be included in these interview guides? There are some non-negotiables that I believe will help make your life easier in the long run, because there is nothing more frustrating than doing an interview, finding a great person, only to find out 2 or 3 weeks down the road through the recruitment flow that there is a misalignment somewhere. And so oftentimes we can find those misalignments even by doing a pre-interview email, asking some basic questions, or doing a pre-screen, a virtual screen, asking some basic questions. What are those basic questions? So one of those things is availability. Oftentimes we need to know that the hours that this job needs an individual to be working in it the individual that we're interviewing has that availability. So asking that right off the top. If this is a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, perfect. If this is a hybrid job and you need them in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays, great. We need to find out that information right up front so that we're not wasting the candidate's time and we're not wasting our own time. The second is start date. I've been in a few situations where we've gotten to the last stage and we're ready to offer a job only to find out the individual that we're talking to isn't able to start the role for 2 or 3 months, whether they're in a contract or whether they're going away on their honeymoon for an extended vacation around the world. So finding out when the individual is able to start is also really important. This will also help remove that aspect of they start on July 1st and you weren't aware they're getting married on July 15th and needed 2 weeks off. So finding out those questions at the forefront is important. Another one is this idea of hybrid remote in office. So we've had a recruitment job recently where it was a hybrid job, which meant 3 days out of office, working at home, should you so desire, and 2 days were mandatory in office. And it amazes me how many people still applied for the job, went through the initial pre-screen, said, no, I only want remote. Even though you put it in the job description, job posting, that still didn't really sink in. And I mean, there might be a few reasons. Maybe they were just wondering how hybrid is this role, or maybe they were thinking that it wasn't actually hybrid, even though you put it in there. Or maybe it is always my kind of gut is saying they didn't actually read the job posting and they didn't pour over it in the same way that you poured over it when you created it. A few other questions that we like to ask, usually closer to the end of the interview or even in the end of the pre-screen or in that second interview, are things like, if you were to receive this role, what hesitations do you have in accepting it? And this helps us get a better idea when we probe a little bit further about what other interviews are you going through right now? Do you have any timelines that you're working with? Because another thing that we're trying to get cut off at the forefront without having problems is if they're interviewing in their last stages of interviews with other organizations, and we know that our timelines still are going to take 3 to 4 weeks to get to a final decision, we might want to speed up those timelines, or we might want to just let the interviewee know, listen, we're going through interviews this week. We expect to get back to candidates in 2 weeks' time. If you have anything come up in the meantime, please reach out and let us know so that we can assess that accordingly. Because if this is your top candidate and they're getting a job offer next week, and you want to make sure that your hat is in that ring as well so that they can compare 2 job offers and choose what's best for them, then you want to know that up front and not find out after they've accepted the job. Another one is about salary. Now, this is a sticky one as well. So salary, I'm going to say the easiest thing to do is post a salary wage band when you post the job. And this is easy because it helps people screen themselves out. So if your salary band for your position is 45 to 55,000, automatically the people who want 65,000 aren't going to apply. And this is going to save you a lot of time and headache. Now, if you're saying, listen, I don't know where it's going to end up because I might be willing to pay 65,000 if the person comes to the table with 10 years of experience, but if they're junior, I might only want to pay 40,000 if I have to teach them the basics. Then if you don't post that salary, you're going to have to ask that question at some point. And I like to always ask that question at the forefront of the interviews. Again, we want to save your time. We want to save the candidate's time. So asking them, if you were to receive this role, what would your salary requirements look like is a great question to ask at the beginning of that pre-screen. Another thing that you want to ask about is where they saw the posting. And this is just for your own benefit as well, because oftentimes when you're posting a job, you might be posting it on Indeed and then on ZipRecruiter and Monster and Facebook or LinkedIn, and you want to find out where your quality candidates are coming from. So if you have spent all kinds of money on 5 different job boards and all your candidates came from LinkedIn, next time, you might want to put all your eggs in the LinkedIn basket. If they're coming from a variety of places, it gives you a good idea to know where these people are coming from, and not just the applications, but where your quality people are coming from. So you can be sure that you're advertising in the places that you're getting good people from. So we've gone from the basics, some great questions about the basic requirements of the job and what you need to know that this person needs to know as well. So then we're going to move on to questions about the role itself. Now, if you've ever built an interview guide and gone deep diving on the web, you know that there's a lot of questions that you can ask an interviewee sitting in front of you. And it can be down a rabbit hole if you start, Googling interview questions. But I'm going to take you a step back and make this a little bit more simple. I want you to take a look at that job description that you created at the beginning when you started hunting for this role, and start pulling your questions from the job description. So you want to build some questions around their previous experience. You want to build some questions around, the cultural aspect of your organization. You want to build some questions around the skills and abilities of this individual. Now, what I'm going to say from about the previous experience, a great question always is, tell me about, how your previous experience relates to this role. Very easy. They kind of give you a brain dump of their resume in their own words. Another great question to tag on to this, to get to know the individual just a little bit more, is tell me about yourself. Tell me about something about yourself that I can't learn from your resume. Now, if you're a small growing company or if you're a large one, you really want to pick your team very carefully, especially if you're the one who's going to be working one-on-one with them, because there's aspects about how you manage and your organization that are going to be very different than every other organization. So knowing how you are as a manager is going to be very important when you're asking interview questions, to know who to hire, who's going to be the right fit to work with your leadership style. Now, I'm not saying that, your leadership style shouldn't flex. Absolutely, your leadership style should flex. But there are some core ways that we as managers and of organizations and leaders of organizations already have innate to us, and finding people who work within that framework is really important. So for example, I'm going to say, if you're a person who is really detailed, and when you give instructions, you give the 10-point plan about how to accomplish what you want done, that is a fantastic skill. And there are certain people who will value that as an employee when they get detailed instructions and have a play-by-play and the right steps so that they go confidently into a task and accomplishing that task. You will find that some people are very loyal to you and appreciate that leadership style. Other people give the big picture and not a lot of tasks in the middle, not a lot of steps in the middle, and they just say, this is what I want accomplished. And then there's a lot of vagueness in between what needs to be accomplished and the first step. And there's some individuals who love that as employees. They love the creativity that they can have to accomplish those tasks. Now, if you're somewhere in the middle, that's fantastic as well. But knowing how you lead, because if you find a person who loves the creativity of a vague task, or who likes to accomplish things in their own manner, and you would like to give the play-by-play and the 10-step plan, you can have a misalignment of your team member to how you manage, and it's going to cause frustration. On the flip side, if you're if your employee likes to have a lot of details and you don't give a lot of details, they're going to be constantly frustrated. So finding the right fit for your leadership style is important. Also for your team, if you've already built a team, if your team works very collaboratively, and you talk about things a lot, and you hash over things, and you find somebody and you're asking questions about the culture, and you find that they're a great independent worker, they don't necessarily have that background of collaboration, or they might not seem to bend that way, and they join the team and they're not collaborative, there's going to be a misalignment of cultural values there. Vice versa. Again, none of these things are a pro or a con. If you're a detailed person, or if you're a high-level, vague instruction giver, both of those things are strengths. Same with your culture. If you have a very independent culture, people are really great at getting things accomplished on their own. Or if you have a really collaborative culture and everybody brings ideas to the table and you all go back and take away those ideas and build upon them, either one of those is really good. But knowing your culture and asking the questions to find out about the individual's background and what they work best under is important. So going back to the job knowledge. So you can do a chronological run through of the resume, but then there's other things you want to talk about. So when you pull out those pieces from the job description, I'm going to use an example of a recruitment job we did recently for a project manager slash AutoCAD operator. So one of the things that they really wanted, they have a collaborative environment, was around communication. And not just about, how do you collaborate, but when times get tough, when things don't go perfectly, how do you communicate with your team? So one of the questions that we asked was, tell me about a time there was a difference of opinion on how to accomplish a task. And then they go on and tell you about that time. What was your role and how did you feel and what was accomplished and what hiccups came along the road? You don't want just the high level, but you want to find out what really happened. What was the nitty gritty? Who got mad at who and how did you come together at the end of it? And when you ask these questions about, tell me about a time when, you get more real answers versus if you just tell me what you would do if. Then you get some pie in the sky, but you really want them to dig into their background and experience to find out examples of when this happened and how it was accomplished. Another one that they had was around problem solving. Obviously, the detail orientedness needed for this role is very high. So instead of saying, what would you do if you made an error? We wanted to tell me about a time that an error happened during your draft. And how did you correct it? How did you notice it? And how did you correct it? What were the implications? Did you bring it to somebody's attention? Did someone bring it to your attention? We want to find out what happens when those things occur and how they operate in those situations. Another question that we like to ask, which is more of a generic question, is what were the challenges in your previous role? So we want to find out what things that they have to overcome in their previous role. And to tag on to that, I always like, what do you think the challenges are going to be in this role? I want to know that they've put some thought into what this role looks like and what they might come up against. And when those challenges come up, what are they going to do to help to overcome those challenges personally? When it comes to team and team environments, a lot of people, love to write that line on their resume. I work well in a team or independently. And I think it's like one of the most overused statements in resumes or in an interview. But I really want to know, what does that look like? Like, you may be able to work in both, but what is your preference and how do you work within a team? So one of the questions that we've liked to use recently is, in a team environment, what role do you take on? What do you personally bring to a team? So we start that off by saying, tell me about a team that you were on in a workplace that worked well together, that just had synergy. And usually some people can come up with one or two great examples. And then we go on to ask, what was your role in that team? What did you bring to the team? Because sometimes, a passive participant is fantastic, and that's what we need to complement our team. But sometimes we need somebody who's going to be a creative brain or bring ideas to the table. Sometimes if you have a very loud team or a very exuberant team, you might not want to add another person with the same personality to that mix. You might want to add somebody who is more of a thinker and then a speaker versus a speaker and then a thinker. Another question we love to ask about culture is, instead of, asking about what type of managerial style do you like, which is a little bit vague, and you get an answer that's really vague as well. I like to flip that around and say, tell me about a manager. Tell me about your best manager. What manager did you work well with? And then they go on to explain what that manager is. What is it about that manager that made you motivated, or that helped you learn or helped you grow? What was it about that relationship that made it special? And this is a question for you as a manager or as a hiring manager. that's equally as important as for that individual to figure out what type of team or manager they work best under as well. I'm going to finish this up really quickly because I know we're supposed to be on these 10 or 15-minute lives, and I'm going on to 20 minutes now, but I could talk about interviews forever. And building interview guides has always been one of my most favorite tasks when it comes to HR, because if you have that strong, there goes my phone. If you have that strong job description, building an interview guide off of it becomes such an easy task that usually your interview guide is too long versus too short. And so I'm going to encourage you to take a look at the download we have and use that as a template and add in your own job experience questions. But this is the thing that you want to consider. Your pre-screen, like if you're doing a video pre-screen, you probably want that to be about 30 minutes. You want it to be light. You want it to get the basic information out. A second interview is often, you want to keep that as long as you want, really. I mean, it could be 2 hours. Or it could be an hour. But typically what we found is if you have about 15 interview questions, you're going to be around that hour mark. Unless the person gives you like one-word answers or doesn't have answers, and then, you're going to be dramatically under that. Or if they're too wordy, you're going to feel that that interview might be going on too long. But that's also really good information for you, because if their answers are succinct and they're complete, but they're short, that tells you something about who they are. If their answers are wordy and they go on and on, kind of like I am going right now, you'll find that that's also a very key important factor in how they communicate. And what you have as flags in those interviews, you will see in practical ways in your if you were to hire that person. So if you have that, like, oh, they're really wordy or they really like to talk a lot, that isn't going to go away when you will hire them. Or if they don't say a lot, I hope they come out of their shell a little bit more. They might not. So those yellow flags of understanding and their personality, take that all into account when you're making your decision. Again, I love the tell me about a time questions versus what would you do. Now, some of the times you can use a what would you do. And the time you want to use a what would you do scenario is when you can think of a practical example from your workplace that you want to know, what would this individual do? I worked at a retail establishment, and one of our general managers, his favorite interview question for when he was hiring was, what would you do when you have a customer in front of you, your phone is ringing, and someone paged you over the intercom, and you can see another customer waiting behind the first customer? What would you do in that scenario? Because in that retail establishment, that was not a far from reality scenario. And trying to have a person think through what that feels like and how would they accomplish that in the interview is very important. So you can use what would you do scenarios, but I encourage you to make them extremely practical and be reflective of actual potential situations that they may come up with in your organization. So I'm going to leave it there. Please take a look and download our favorite interview questions, and keep in touch with us as well. You can reach us at essentialhr.ca. We would love to talk to you further. If you want recruitment support, if you're like, hey, I would love a second set of ears in the interview that I am coming up with, or I'd love for you guys to just build me this interview guide, get it off my plate, we have those services available. So please check that out at essentialhr.ca. We'd love to help you out. We love recruitment. We love building fantastic teams. Have a great day, everybody.